Complexity these days is my kryptonite. Okay. In the beginning of my career, for the first decade or two, I was over here. Okay. I was embracing all the difficult things that programming had to offer. So compiled languages, object-oriented programming, types, just everything they threw at me, I tried to understand, learn. But now I want to have nothing to do with mostly everything that they talk about. Okay, I want to reduce everything, almost like a math equation, to just distill it to its essence. And that's what my programming style is these days. And it's not going to change anymore. This is it. I've found what I like. Now, this slide is especially for the beginners. Never trust anybody that tells you that programming is hard. Okay, programming is easy. There is nothing to programming. It's essentially an event that changes data or an event that displays data. And that's it. It's the same thing again and again and a million times. It's the same thing. It's always this. Yet people make it a lot more complicated than it is. So just keep things as simple as possible. Now, in the beginning of my career, especially when I moved to the corporate type of jobs in finance, and I was mainly working in C# and Java, I dealt with a lot of different technologies, object-oriented programming being the biggest one, and the biggest reason for my complexity. Things such as inheritance and interfaces and types and different design patterns and compilation. I was trapped in complexity. Okay, I try to do everything that they had me do, work in their frameworks. At the time, I didn't really know it, but it was taking me forever to create something because of all these different rules and regulations that today I just would not even look at. Okay, then something happened. I had a job that they moved to using JavaScript instead of WPF C#. They were still using WPF C#, but they changed everything to use web views. And by that, I mean just like a control in C# that it's like a browser control. And inside that browser control, you use JavaScript and HTML. And that is the first time in my entire career that I experienced pure joy and freedom. Okay, because all of our development started shifting to JavaScript. And I took JavaScript the same way I took game development scripting, where, for example, in game development, you have a game engine, for example, that's written in C++, and most of the logic, the game logic, happens in a scripting language, for example, like Lua script. JavaScript works the same way. It's just an easier language than the core. Like, let's say, for example, you have a browser and it's written in C++. The actual language that you write on top of this browser is JavaScript. And the minute I started using JavaScript for business applications, I felt a huge sense of relief. And I was doing everything against what everybody was telling me. Okay, I was using global variables. I was not using design patterns. I was not using classes or object-oriented programming. I just did whatever the hell I wanted. Okay, and my programming, it shot up like I was doing things like 10 times faster. And I felt the greatest I felt. Okay, even the business that I was working for, it benefited from this because I was making things a lot quicker. So it wasn't just benefiting me, it was also benefiting the business that I was working for. Now, something happened in the last few years. A lot of businesses, a lot of developers started moving to JavaScript. Everybody's essentially putting JavaScript everywhere. Okay, so it's getting a huge ton of developers. Also on the server, Node.js is taking a huge market from Java and ASP.NET and Python. It's just currently Node.js is the most popular of all the frameworks. Has the most modules, the most libraries. Same with just JavaScript UI clients. They just have the most stuff. And as a result of this, a lot of developers started coming into this pool, and I was getting frustrated because they were bringing with them all the tools that I try to get away from in the past. Okay. Remember that sense of freedom? Well, now they were bringing all their tools and technologies and object-oriented programming and classes and frameworks and design patterns into into where I was, and they were mudding up the waters. And it was pissing me off. I was getting frustrated by all these new technologies, and I still am frustrated. Which brings me to where I am today. Now I want everybody to get out of my pool. I wanna use YouTube as a bullhorn, right? To just polarize the hell out of anybody that tries to bring complexity into my life. And that includes also, future jobs, stuff like that. I'll show them these videos. I have nothing to hide. This is my programming style. This is removing complexity is Shy UI. So I don't want to have anything to do with complicated stuff. Everything needs to be simple. Everything needs to be streamlined. Everything needs to be fast. And the faster, the better. And I just want to just refer to you to, this is like a quote that Linus Torvalds had back in the day in 2007. And he said, "I've come to the conclusion that any programmer that would prefer the project to be in C++ over C is likely a programmer that I really would prefer to piss off so that he doesn't come and screw up any project I'm involved with." And you could just change the C++ to basically like frameworks and complexity and stuff like that. And C, you could just say just vanilla JavaScript. That's the way I see it, because, history tends to rhyme. C was kind of like the way JavaScript is, a very small language, and C++ is just more abstractions. And that is, I'm kind of like Linus in that way, where I don't want any abstractions. I want it to be as simple as possible. Now, it's not like I didn't try, okay? You can look at my Stack Overflow page. I'm mainly a question asker. There's a lot of people that just answer questions. I mainly like to ask questions, and that's my thing. And right now, currently, I'm in the top 0.5% of Stack Overflow. Okay. Now, if you look at my questions, you'll get a sense of like the different technologies that I was using at the times that I was asking those questions. And now that I look back at all this stuff, it's completely meaningless. Okay. All the questions that it's not completely meaningless in the fact that I gained experience from it, but it's meaningless in the fact that I spent a lot of my time on technologies that were just wasting my time. I didn't understand it at the time, and I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. But yeah, don't take technologies too seriously, because the frameworks, they're not loyal. Okay, they change all the time. A lot of the things that I ask, that I've talked about in this, in my Stack Overflow stuff, a lot of the things in frameworks are deprecated. Okay, all technologies eventually fade away. They have a lifespan. Now, I just want to go over the different entities that make your life harder that you might just not be aware of. Okay, and just so you can watch out for them. The first is the architecture astronaut. Okay, every company has at least one of these guys. They'll basically tell you to use certain complexities. For example, I had one developer that always wanted to do dependency injection. He'd always say that word. "Oh, we should do it with dependency injection." He'd love to say that. To this day, I could care less what dependency injection is. Okay. Now, in my last company, or not in my last company, actually, like a few years back, because I work in the architecture team for my current job, and we had a guy come in, and like most architect astronauts, he was just there for just a year to maybe a year and a half or something like that. But he came in, and he was, I work in finance, and he wanted, well, we had him make a grid, because in finance you just have tons and tons of data and grids. And he decided to use React for that, and Redux, and Babel, and crazy ES6 language syntax, and different frameworks. Just different, like just 100 different keywords to do this silly little grid that I could do in maybe like a day. But he was using so many frameworks, so many technologies just to create this. I think he used Mongo. He just used like a ton of different technologies. At the time I thought, you know what, like we'll let him do this because React is kind of, it was kind of getting traction in the industry. And it still is very popular, but guess what? As soon as he left, and by the way, every architect or astronaut leaves, all they want to do is collect as many keywords as they can and then off to the next job. Okay, so as soon as he left, I can tell you that nobody wanted to deal with anything that he wrote. It's the most complicated stuff you've ever seen. I'm talking about thousands of lines of code to do absolutely nothing, and nobody wants to have anything to do with what he created. So how does that make programming any easier? All these crazy libraries. Well, it doesn't. And that's my point. That's why I created this channel, to tell you that you don't need a lot of these frameworks, and it doesn't make anything easier for the business. It actually makes everything harder for the business. It creates versioning issues. It creates just complexity of code. Nobody wants to deal with your code afterwards. Okay, you're not making it any easier for future developers either when you use a ton of technologies that become deprecated anyway in a few years. Now, that's not to say that a library like React or Angular, like they don't have their place, because there are situations, that maybe they are beneficial. For example, you might have a huge corporation like Facebook, for example, that has thousands and thousands and thousands of developers, and you want them all to work in the same fashion. Okay? Maybe in that case, it is beneficial. But, when you apply these huge libraries to small teams, to startups, to individual people, like basically to every single business and it doesn't make programming easier, and I actually think it does the opposite. Another entity I want to talk about that causes complexity are books, especially fat programming books. I remember when I was a kid, I bought this huge, like a 5,000 page Unix book, and I was just like reading it. It's ridiculous. Nobody needs all this information, especially programming books. I mean, if you ever see a programming book and it has like a cute little animal on the cover, you run. Okay, you don't walk, you run. Just get out of there. These programming books, they're essentially like dictionaries. They're like encyclopedia references of every little language feature that a language has, but you rarely use all of a language's feature. Okay, programming in general shouldn't take more than just a few pages to explain how to program. That is, you only need a few pages. Somebody will explain to you exactly what you need to do. Shouldn't take more than a few pages, maybe like a pamphlet or something. But that's it. Don't overcomplicate things. And another entity that causes complexity for new developers are professors, college, university professors. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't study computer science, okay? I studied computer science. It's a fun experience. It's fun as an exercise in problem solving. But you got to keep in mind that these professors, they teach ancient technologies, like a linked list. I mean, you're going to go through courses that most of the things that you're not even going to use in an application environment, memory management, linked lists. I see like a lot of these programming interviews that interview on linked lists. Like, let me give you a little secret. Nobody gives a shit about linked lists. Okay. Unless you're like, I don't know, doing embedded programming, or you're inside like a game engine. Maybe then you'd use a linked list, but you're not going to deal with this stuff, in modern technology. You just won't. I mean, it's fun to learn everything you can about computer science, but a lot of it is just it's just complexity. Now, another thing that causes complexity are coding channels on YouTube, and I'm talking about the bigger ones. And to me, they're not even coders; they're just keyword marketers, and they do an incredible job at this. But they're not really teaching what they actually use. Okay, all they're doing is they're compiling and summarizing as many technologies and keywords as possible. Okay, so every language, every library, every technology, and that's just in order to increase their keywords. So it's almost like a big kind of like the book example that I gave you. I don't know. I'm kind of cautious to listen to what they say because they're not even using what they're teaching. They're just kind of creating like references, like a big encyclopedia type of deal. Now, another thing that causes complexity is using multiple languages. Okay, a lot of times I'll see people using one language on the server and a different language on the client. It's like, why would you do that to yourself? Like, why do you, like I see a lot of, for example, Java developers or Python developers, and they're using those languages on the server. And meanwhile, they have to use JavaScript on the client because they don't have a choice, right? The client is always, well, most of the time these days is JavaScript. So now they're dealing with two different languages. And every time they go between these languages, they have to context switch in their mind, like, oh, okay, now I have like a completely different syntax. And because of this, sometimes you'll have like a team of, let's say, two people, one on the server, one on the client, just so they can handle this amount of complexity. And it's like, why are you doing this to yourself? Now, I know what you're saying to yourself, but Shai, how are we going to get a job? Like they're looking for all these keywords like React and Angular and just a million other keywords, even if it's just JavaScript. And to that, I say, you are not a set of keywords, okay? You are not a resume. This isn't 2010 anymore where you can just send some company a resume. Well, maybe you can, but you will increase your odds significantly if you can just show what you've done as opposed to sending them some resume with a bunch of keywords. So, bring a laptop to interview, send them links, show them the things that you've done. Focus more on creating a portfolio. Maybe you can do a GitHub. Maybe you can do a YouTube channel. Maybe you can create a website. Maybe you can create an app. Just show things that you've done. Okay, this resume keyword thing, it's not fooling anybody. All these frameworks. Okay, create your own framework. Why do you need to use these frameworks that everybody's using? They might benefit a few large corporations, right? These frameworks, but for the majority of people, I don't think they're going to benefit you too much. And technologies and keywords, they always come second to things that you can show. Okay, all languages ultimately achieve similar outcomes. You can show that you have design skills, whatever. Just show what you can bring the company. Don't worry about these keywords. They mean absolutely nothing. So, how do you get started? Well, just create something. Okay, it could be an app, a demo, a website, anything you want. And just choose the technologies for it and create it. Now, Google is your main friend, and it's the main way to learn programming. Just type in any type of thing that you're trying to accomplish and be as specific as possible. The more keywords you can type in, the better. And, anything that you want to do, you can just type in Stack Overflow after that phrase. For example, let's say, how do I change the border of a div in HTML? Space Stack Overflow, and you'll go to the first or second link and you'll see hundreds of people talking about that because everybody has already implemented everything that you can even imagine. We've already crowdsourced any type of problem that you're going to get or run into has already been solved hundreds of times. Understand that programming and development, right? There is absolutely no subject that comes close to the amount of information that you're going to find about programming. Not even by a long shot. Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow by far is the biggest in that network. And just the amount of websites and tutorials and stuff that you have about programming, you'll never find for any other subject. And just use whatever. I mean, when you do decide to create a demo, just use whatever you think is best. Okay, let's say you don't like what I have to say and you want to use some frameworks. That's totally fine. It's up to you. Don't worry about what my preferences are. Always go with what you want to do. Develop your own style. My style is minimalism. I don't like to use anything nowadays. Well, the least amount of things as possible. But maybe that's not for you, and that's completely fine. We don't all have to code the same way. There are thousands and thousands of developers that have different specialties. So, yeah. And if you have any questions, just ask them down below, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay,